The Rural Fire Service has been slammed over the fatal crash of an air tanker at the height of the Black Summer bushfires. 3 Americans on board were killed. The scathing report by the country's transport safety investigator was handed down today, finding a lack of communication played a major part.
January 2020, the charred remains of the giant C130 Hercules tanker, which crashed and claimed all 3 American crew on board.
All 3 were far from home, helping to defend lives and property during the worst fire season in Australia on record.
Rick De Morgan, Ian Macbeth and Paul Hudson had volunteered to come here. A 2-year investigation by the Australian Transport Safety Bureau, the ATSB, has found the plane likely stalled in the hazardous conditions. It's second-by-second animation recreating the final moments as the plane battled wind shear, tailwinds and low visibility. But there was criticism too for the Rural Fire Service for failing to pass the crew critical information.
It was still a situation where they were operating with partial knowledge and not the full picture.
The report finds the RFS pushed ahead with the mission despite an awareness of the extreme environmental conditions and that all other fire control aircraft were not operating in the area at the time. The others had found it too dangerous to fly.
I'm not convinced that that necessarily was related to the crash itself on that day, but I accept we need to make sure that we improve systems for the future.
The report also found the RFS had limited tanker supervision, no procedures for unsupervised deployment or managing task rejections or sharing that information with other pilots. The investigation levelled criticism not just at the Rural Fire Service as the tasking agency, but also at Coulson Aviation, the operator of the American tanker. The ATSB saying both had to share the responsibility. The RFS has been slapped with 3 safety warnings, Coulson with 2. Chris Reason, 7 News.
Lot to answer for. That's the message to the Rural Fire Service from the family of one of 3 American pilots killed while fighting bushfires in 2020 near Cooma. It comes after a report into the air tanker crash revealed the crew was not told by the RFS that other aircraft refused to fly due to the conditions being unsafe.
It is the largest aircraft to crash in Australia, a Hercules C130 firefighting tanker colliding into the snowy mountains, killing the 3 American crew on board.
All 3 were far from home, helping to defend lives and property during the worst fire season in Australia on record.
A report by the Australian Transport Safety Bureau effectively finding conditions were far too treacherous and the air tanker shouldn't have been in that fire zone.
In hindsight, clearly it was a dangerous place to be.
Paul Hudson, Rick De Morgan and Ian Macbeth were flying in Peak View near Cooma in January 2020. At 1:15 in the afternoon, they dropped retardant on the bushfire, but in 22 seconds, the plane tried to climb, stalled and then crashed.
The aircraft likely aerodynamically stalled when flying in hazardous conditions that included wind shear and an increasing tailwind.
Not only had other planes stopped firefighting, the spotter aircraft that was supposed to fly ahead of the tanker also refused because it was too dangerous.
All other small aircraft had departed that area and weren't operating.
Ian Macbeth's wife, Bowden, told 9 News from the United States those in the best positions to determine if it was safe to send the plane up have let all our families down and they have a lot to answer for.
It is a difficult environment to try and get it as absolutely safe as we can, but still do the job that we need to do. But at the end of the day, the pilot does make the call.
Captain Macbeth's wife doesn't buy that, saying it is a relief to finally receive a report that exonerates the crew and my husband of any wrongdoing.
The RFS will overhaul its aviation policies, promising to provide as much detailed information to pilots before they fly as aerial firefighting becomes more and more common. The pilot's family hoping nobody else has to endure this pain.
This, of course, does not bring back my husband or my children's father, Mrs. Macbeth said, but it provides me with some answers. Chris O'Keefe, 9 News.
A three-man American air crew that died during our horrendous Black Summer bushfires were not given critical information that might have saved their lives. The final report from the air crash investigator found that every other aircraft that day had been grounded, but that information had not been passed on. Our National Affairs editor Hugh Riminton has the story.
Flying a massive C130 Hercules, low and slow, dropping retardant on a blaze raging near Cooma, the three-member American crew lost out in the contest between daring and the laws of physics.
All three were far from home, helping to defend lives and property during the worst fire season in Australia on record.
Before taking off that day, veteran American pilot Ian Macbeth was warned by another firefighting pilot conditions were so bad he was grounding himself. Captain Macbeth was not told every other aircraft, large and small, had also been grounded.
They were operating with partial knowledge and not the full picture.
Had they been told, the investigations chief says,
then we may have seen a different outcome.
In overall charge was the New South Wales Rural Fire Service. It will now institute changes.
Do you feel any sense of blame?
Well, no, I don't feel a sense of blame, but I do feel a sense, I guess, of shared loss.
The crew that died when their plane stalled that day were among 200 American specialists helping us that bushfire season, many of them hired by the world's largest aerial firefighting contractors, Coulson Aviation. Aerial firefighting is not just here to stay, it will become increasingly central as we face longer and hotter fire seasons. Fire authorities say there are also great risks to human life in not flying.
We've got to keep bombing those fires because if we don't, then we lift the risk for the people on the ground.
It is impossible, says the RFS, to eliminate all risk. After months of rain across eastern Australia, the dangers this summer will not be in our forests so much as fast-burning fire fronts across the plains.
These rains have just seen grass growing more than a metre tall right across the state in areas that we haven't seen grass for decades.
Hugh Riminton for 10 News First.
The pilots are the ones that make the decisions. They look at the fire grounds, they make a decision on whether it's safe to do something or not. We'll be enacting the recommendations from the ATSB.